Milosevic deserves a prized place in the Hall of Shame, where the deeds of the likes of Adolf Hitler and Saddam Hussein are enshrined. If we ever put up a museum of megalomaniacs, Milosevic will get his own wing. And so, even as the world reacts in outrage to Milosevic's crimes, his guns still fire on Dubrovnik, and his stormtroopers still ravage the tiny nation of Bosnia. Mr. President, let me say something that in light of the terrible scenes from Croatia and Bosnia, scenes of cities and towns in flame, of men, women, and children dead and dying on the streets, let me say something that in light of those sickening scenes, as unbelievable as it may sound, you haven't seen anything yet. Because Milosevic's assaults on the nations of Croatia and Bosnia were only the dress rehearsal for the greater drama of building his, quote, greater Serbia. The climatic scenes are being planned and prepared for right now, and they're going to be played out in the near-forgotten region of Kosova. Kosova, it used to be an autonomous province within the former Yugoslavia. It actually used to enjoy some semblance of autonomy in the form of its own parliamentary assembly and a local government that was made up of people who were more than just stooges for Belgrade. But that, of course, was intolerable to Milosevic, and so long before Yugoslavia fell apart and Milosevic went to war against Croatia and Bosnia, he staged a silent war against the people of Kosova. A war which led to the de facto abrogation of Kosova's autonomy, shutting down of the assembly, imprisonment, torture, and harassment of thousands, the murder of unknown scores or hundreds, and the purposeful economic devastation of an entire region. And what did the people of Kosova do to incite Milosevic's enmity? The truth is, what they did was to be born. Born not as Serbs and supporters of Milosevic, but born as ethnic Albanians, proud of their ancient culture, desirous of their human rights, and aspiring to a chance for a normal life for themselves and their children. 2 million people made that awful mistake. They were born Albanians in a place called Kosova that Milosevic coveted for his, quote, greater Serbia. And now Milosevic plans and plots for the final conquest of Kosova. Mark my words, as soon as the fighting ends in Bosnia, and even perhaps before that, Serbian forces will seek to gobble up Kosova, exterminate or drive out those Albanians who have lived there for centuries, and put the final piece into Milosevic's greater Serbia empire. Albanians by the thousands and thousands will be slaughtered. Albanians by the hundreds of thousands will flee for their lives. An Albanian nation of 2 million people will, for all practical purposes, cease to exist. That's what Milosevic has in mind. That's what he has on the drawing boards. He has sown the seeds in Croatia and Bosnia, and he will harvest his greater Serbia in the killing fields of Kosova. Mr. President, the world pretty much stood by and watched while Milosevic tried to dismember Croatia, and he's still trying. Until the past few weeks, the world also stood by and watched while he rolled over Bosnia. And finally, we have started to take some real action. Finally, we have summoned up the humanity to face up to what was really happening in Bosnia, and summoned up the courage to impose a total economic embargo on Milosevic. I don't want to be a total pessimist. Maybe there is hope that the embargo will work. Certainly the cutoff of oil, if it holds, could at least slow down Milosevic's war machine. Maybe Bosnia can still somehow be saved. I will continue to hope and pray that that happens. And as I have said since the beginning, I will continue to speak out for whatever it takes, whatever actions necessary, and including, yes, the use of arms under a UN-sponsored military invention to stop Milosevic, to stave the millions of lives that are at stake and at risk. But no matter how the ongoing conflict of Croatia and Bosnia are resolved, Milosevic's eye still remains adamantly focused on Kosova. He intends to have it sooner or later. As we work for peace, and a restoration of sovereignty for Croatia and Bosnia, we cannot forget or bargain away the fate of the 2 million Albanians of Kosova. They are the next course on Milosevic's menu. We cannot give Milosevic a green light, explicitly or implicitly, knowingly or inadvertently, to consume Kosova and its people. Whatever agreement we reach must include real binding assurances that the people of Kosovo will have real peace. They will have their rights, including the right of self-determination. They have a right for a future for themselves and their children. The fate of 2 million people is in the balance. The killing fields of Kosovo will be their future unless we, the United States, free the world, civilized people everywhere, unless we act, and act now. Mr. President, we finally acted. When I say we, I talk about the United States of America in pursuing a course that brings about sanctions against Milosevic. We should have undertaken that course a long time ago. We should be ashamed that it took us as long as it did to summon up the courage to bring an embargo to a dictator and to a killer. We should hang our heads in shame. The State Department was absolutely negligent and derelict in their duty and in their job to stand up for human rights. It was pussyfooting. It was trying to buy time with this killer, with this maniac. And we saw repeatedly, just as we did with Saddam Hussein, someone who was bound and determined to bring about his expansion. We could have saved lives. We could have made a difference. Now, I hope we don't do the same thing here. I hope we don't say, okay, you withdraw your troops after the embargo's teeth begins to sink in, and we'll look the other way as you annihilate the ethnic Albanians. 2 million, they constitute 90% of the population in Kosovo. And what was their crime? To be born Albanians. I didn't think in this day and age to be born something, black, white, Christian, Muslim, should constitute a reason to exterminate people. And I have to tell you something, the United States shouldn't be proud of its lack of action in what used to be known as Yugoslavia. They should hang their heads in shame. I talked to the Secretary of State, to the Deputy Undersecretary, and I was told this is a European matter. Why was it a European matter? We delegated our responsibility in terms of standing up for what's morally right. We should have terminated our relationship with him a year ago. We had an ample warning. We had a delegation of senators who went there and who saw for our eyes the human rights violations that took place. And to simply say this was a European matter and do business as usual is not good enough for a great nation. And that's what's happening with too much frequency. And I would hope that we not see this tragedy repeat itself again. And when I see the media applauding our action at this point in time, they should hang their heads in shame. We should have brought about an economic embargo against Milosevic a year ago. And then he would have understood that we were serious. And instead of doing it now and now talking about possibly backing up the UN and using troops. It's a shameful moment in our history that tens of thousands are killed, that hundreds of thousands, maybe millions, are made refugees because we didn't have the courage to even bring about some kind of diplomatic sanctions against a killer and a thug who belongs, yes, with the likes of Hitler. I don't know if we've ever learned, and I'm not going to keep quiet and watch this continue to take place. I want to say this now. The State Department doesn't focus in on the rights of the people of Kosovo. The blood that will follow when those people, when the killer machine turns, as it has in the past, Milosevic's killer machine on them, will rest on their hands. Mr. President, I suggest an absence of a quorum.
The absence of a quorum has been suggested. The clerk will call the roll.